Welcome to Energy Thinks, a podcast about the oil and gas industry's role in the energy future. I'm Tisha Schuller, your host and the CEO of Adamantine Energy. I'm happy to bring you this solo pod, the first of season 9. Longtime listeners know I am about to release my next book, The Myth and the Moment, From Polarization to Progress in the New Energy Future. And so all my interviews and solo pods of this season will center around the themes of the book about the end of the myth of an easy energy transition and the moment that we are in to, I think, really transform the way energy and climate are both politicized and manifest in policy going forward. So I never know exactly what I'm going to talk about, but what I think I might talk about is I'll give you a little updates on what's happening in my world, talk about political overreach and what that looks like when we do it, what that looks like when others do it, and then what's the alternative? What's the way to be thinking about durable, predictable business environments? I hope that you will go to energythinks.com or Substack and sign up for my newsletter. Both of these things are true, where I work through these same ideas in a little more disciplined fashion than I do in the solo pods. And I hope you enjoy today's solo podcast. All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm happy to be back. I just spent 3 days at college orientation. There was only really one day, but it was new to me. My youngest is going to college in an undisclosed location in the Northwest. And now they do, maybe they always did, but I've never experienced this. They do like an all-day parent orientation, which for those of you who know me, will know that it was kind of torturous because I love efficiency in all things. So if there's information you want to give me and there's an efficient way to get it to me, that's what you should do, not shuttle me around for 12 hours to different things. But my delightful husband, who I adore, had the good sense to take me to do a little day drinking. And then we returned and I was much more amenable to the slow pace of information. But we had a great time. My youngest is going to college here this fall, and that feels exciting. Like, I really accomplished something getting these kids out and launched. So that was lovely. I also discovered this like kind of weird little town with spectacular food. I am not a foodie by any stretch of the imagination, but I have the good sense to enjoy very delicious food when it arrives in front of me, particularly if it's paired with an interesting, creative whiskey or bourbon-based cocktail. So I really enjoyed myself, enjoyed the little family time, enjoyed a trip to the coast, enjoyed, because of course, it won't surprise you to know that my son was like, why are you guys even here? I can do this all by myself. So I got a lot of quality time exploring with my husband, Brian, who's just a spectacular companion. So lots to look forward to once we empty nest this fall. Some of you are also curious about how the half marathon training is going. I think last time I gave you an update, I was ahead of schedule. Well, after 7 straight weeks of traveling, I am now a little behind schedule, but happy to report Brian and I have made it up to 10 miles. I'd like to make it to 13 before a half. And our half is a mountain half, so it has a lot of climbing. So I prefer to get to at least 12 miles with a lot of climbing before, because, I like to be well prepared for everything. But we're at 10 miles. We haven't done any hills yet. So hopefully this weekend we're going to get in a 9-miler with hills. So we have about 6 weeks left. So I am not ahead anymore. But nevertheless, it's a nice thing we do together. We just do one a year to have a little reason to get in shape. So I'll keep you posted on how that's going. And no, knock on wood, no injuries. So that's going well. Thanks for your interest in my fitness journey here. And then the company, just a couple quick interesting updates about Adamantine. This year, 2025 is interesting because we have 2 non-oil and gas company projects. They're, of course, oil and gas adjacent. That's why industries come to us. Our clients are confidential, so I can't share particulars. But we are working at the interface of tech and energy development, unsurprisingly. And that is giving me really interesting perspective because, as you all know, I have feet in these worlds, the climate world, the environmental world, and then, of course, the energy, the oil and gas world. But then looking at it from where tech companies sit right now, super interesting. Also helps me, it gives me some confidence when I talk a little bit about center lefty stuff that like there's still a lot of companies and places in the country where that sort of climate centric or left mindset is still dominant. And it gives me confidence in talking about how we need to be thoughtful of it. We also have a methane emitting client of a different industry. And it's so interesting just to see the parallels, right? The challenges our industry has with development, with community engagement, with managing regulatory uncertainty. These translate really well to working with other companies. And so our little firm of 10 people has some really interesting, diverse workload right now that I'm really enjoying seeing. All right, which brings me to the topic of today, which is I want to talk about overreach. And what I mean by that is I want to talk about when people make sort of outrageous claims or expectations based on the politics of the moment. The first example I'll give is happening on the left, on the climate centric left, but even on the center left, because most of my audience is from the oil and gas industry, and you'll enjoy me talking about my center lefty tribe and some of the mistakes I think they're making. And then I'll talk about ways I think that oil and gas industry supporters are doing some overplaying of their hand as well. And then between those two poles, I think we could do a little thinking about what a middle path looks like and why we care about a middle path. And I'm not exactly sure what all I have to say on this topic. So together we shall see. So first I'm doing some writing. I'm testing out doing some writing both for our industry. You'll see it in both of these things are true, but also a general piece I'm going to try to place as an opinion piece on this slew of headlines blaming the big, beautiful bill on future rising energy prices. So, got to give credit to a couple of the group. I'll link them in the show notes that did these like quick response. The big, beautiful bill will have this effect on energy prices because those couple reports drove headlines for several days that all reported as if a fact that price spikes were coming and the big, beautiful bill was to blame. And I thought this is interesting, right? Because of course it's modeling, like, the assumptions were made, results were assessed. But a couple things surprised me. One, the sort of gospel this was taken as in places like Axios's Generate, which I read every week, with interest, most days with interest. But it was sort of taken without question in a way that I thought was, I don't know, not particularly discerning. And so that led me to thinking about like, one, why are we getting all these headlines? And I think the answer to that is pretty obvious. Like, if you're at all lefty, center lefty to far lefty, you want reasons to say the big, beautiful bill is going to be bad for consumers, for voters, for the general public. And I think there are plenty of very credible things to point to in the big, beautiful bill that might raise prices and expenses for consumers across the board. But this idea that now energy prices are going to go up struck me as, frankly, insincere. Like energy prices were going to go up anyway for a lot of reasons, many of which center around the fact that climate policy has dominated energy policy and led to a real shortfall of access to natural gas, for example, in the Northeast, both for power generation and for direct use in homes and businesses. There's a lot of other things like how inflation has raised costs for all infrastructure, but including wind and solar, right? Like there were a lot of costs coming, a lot of redundant needs to build, for example, natural gas that would only run at 15% of the time to, support renewable mandates, like a lot of expenses around energy that were coming anyway. And so the idea that suddenly there was going to be this one thing that peaked energy costs, I have just found that, well, one, I guess I shouldn't question the sincerity. Let's just say I'm sure it's a sincere critique, but it doesn't strike me as an accurate or fair accounting of what was likely to happen anyway to energy prices and what is going to happen now to energy prices. So, why do I care about this? A couple things. One, I am worried that the myth of an easy energy transition, which was becoming, I think, evident to close to everyone, that if you suddenly now can blame the failure of the energy transition, for example, or rising expenses of the energy system, if you can blame that on, say, the Trump administration or Republicans in Congress or the big beautiful bill, there's no need then for sincere climate advocates to reckon with the real world difficulties of having an affordable, reliable, growing energy system. And I think we need to have that reckoning. So, my interest and caution is to call appropriate bullshit on overreach, over blaming any one thing that might raise energy costs. And if some of you listeners have pushback for me that's grounded in data, I would love to see that. So do send that over. But otherwise, I think that this is a bit of a warning to those of us in the oil and gas industry about how strong the myth is and how much proponents of the myth will take advantage of this political moment to say that the energy transition would have been simple and easy, but for these politics. And we need to be ready for that because the political winds will shift. And if the myth takes hold again, that'd be a real bummer. My magic 8 ball says all signs point to yes, that's what's happening. So, okay, so we cannot control how people who are supporters of the idea of the myth of an easy energy transition, we cannot control how they play things out, but we can control the ways in which we participate. And there's a couple of things I think supporters of the oil and gas industry, supporters of fossil fuels are doing poorly. And I want to call that out as well. Because I think calling out our own in groups, of which I happen to belong to both of these, is really important because no one is interested in a critique from the other political, but sincere critiques from people within your in group, I think, are more likely to land. So I was just on a call this morning, kind of a libertarian, climate-y group. And there were a couple speakers who were sort of talking about the merits and gifts of fossil fuels. And I thought that was kind of weird and incongruous that in a place where you want to have free markets and you want to have all of the above and let everything sort of stand or die on its own merits, there is this weird thing happening right now where fossil fuels are getting this sort of like haloed status. I, like many of you, acknowledge and recognize that there are many historic fuels on the journey to today and on the journey to prosperity that have played like really important historical roles, right, in transforming industrialization and economies over time. And the march of society is ever lower carbon intensity fuels and ever smaller footprint of our energy sources. And so the idea of sort of lionizing fossil fuels is like, in my mind, it's a reaction to how we were vilified. And I say we because oil and gas is, was certainly vilified as a fossil fuel. And in fact, if people, you would see back in the day that people would call natural gas fossil gas, just try to make it extra evil. But I don't think we should do the opposite. I don't think we should say, oh, they, whomever, were anti-fossil fuels. So we should be what, like, ridiculously pro fossil fuels as like a generic brotherhood of carbon centric molecules. That seems dumb. So let's not do that. I find that nonsensical. We can acknowledge that all of our current technology, industrialization, human flourishing success has been built on the shoulders of the giants of industry who brought us here. We can also say that, may the best fuel source win going forward. And the lower its carbon intensity, the smaller its physical footprint, the less the trade-offs around water, non-greenhouse gas emissions, land footprint, like all of these trade-offs. I think we can and should all agree that may the best fuels win. And sometimes you're going to need things that produce electrons, and sometimes you're going to need things that move in molecules. And we should want to continue to improve those and not hold on to some, like, I don't know, flag of fuels of the past or something. It just seems so silly. Okay. So let's be mindful anytime you're somewhere where it seems like we're about to have a pro fossil fuel parade. That just seems silly. Pro progress, pro better, pro all of the above. And then in that same spirit, it's a bummer that the Trump administration is doing this anti-wind and anti-solar things. And I'm sure there are pockets where cooler heads are prevailing and saying this is really about, leveling the playing field, all of the above. But some of these executive orders to like root out special advantages for wind and solar, for example, that could just be, let's just root out special advantages for any fuel. Let's like I'm all for leveling the playing field. Although let's also be clear that that means we have to really commit to that across the board. And we're not all like, say natural gas or oil isn't always going to win as the fuel of choice in some situations. But the sort of being anti something seems super silly and counterproductive and likely to continue the overreach back and forth as we go from one political environment to another. And maybe it's not a pendulum that swings in essentially 2 dimensions. Maybe this is more like a pendulum that could swing in 3 dimensions. We don't know where things will go next, but we can be pretty sure that this political moment will change. And there's a lot of silly stuff going on right now. I think that we can confidently be pro all of the above, pro best fuel, pro maximizing upside and minimizing trade-offs, with an understanding that a lot of those trade-offs are value choices that will need to be made by communities where the fuels or power is needed. So, and then I guess in that last spirit, I am watching with interest the EPA's drop of the endangerment finding. And I don't have a strong opinion yet because it's all happening in real time. And, you see sort of the usual, I think, overreactions both ways around the endangerment finding. And this is for those who don't know what I'm talking about. The EPA saying essentially that greenhouse gases aren't a danger to humans and therefore EPA can't regulate them, which is a hill that many, even moderate, reasonable environmental groups are prepared to die on. I just have that sick feeling where you're like, this is not going to end well. And I hope that at the right time, there will be a bipartisan, maybe the Problem Solvers Caucus effort for Congress to get involved and actually come up with some common sense middle ground. Lower carbon intensity is a huge US advantage around the world. Like, we don't need to pretend this is a non-issue. It's a freaking issue. And it's also a competitive advantage. So let's put our heads together and figure out how to win in a world that's going to continue to lower its carbon intensity and not do this sort of like nonsense one-upmanship. I don't know where the endangerment falls on that. I am open to your feedback and thoughts so that I have an opinion. I just don't like the way it's happening right now. It feels like this is going to end really badly for us. In a world where people want to blame the oil and gas industry for non-climate action, this looks and feels like something that is going to be held against us at some point. And I'm looking forward to having more coherent thoughts on that. I welcome your 2 cents on that. Okay, so let's transition into what can we do about this as just your average industry supporter or industry adjacent person who's interested and curious about these things. The first thing is, I mentioned this already, I'll mention it again. It's a theme of my work. We have to push back on our end group, right? Like you can't, like, it's funny, people will always want me to push back on whoever their other is. So if, my climate centric friends are like, you need to tell the oil and gas industry X, and my oil and gas industry clients and colleagues are saying, you need to make sure that the, climate advocates understand why. Well, here's the thing. None of that is particularly effective coming from another, but we should be talking to our own in groups. And so in this instance, I'm talking to the oil and gas industry, and I'm telling you, we got to push back on some of this overreach, this pro fossil fuels generically, this anti wind and solar, even this anti climate action or anti greenhouse gas. This is not a middle way. This is not a durable path. It is common sense to be considering how to make our energy system ever cleaner, ever better. And we can do that with an emphasis on growing to meet demand, reliability, and affordability. So I think that being common sense about a middle ground, a competitive environment, room for all of the above, I think that's going to be really important. And we need to narrate that with our peers, with our colleagues, with our supporters. The second thing is it now is really the time to be contemplating durable policy. We are missing, I think, an opportunity right now to create, for example, the kind of permitting reform that could be durable over time by having groups that are bipartisan, having groups that are looking to make friends in other arenas, come together to make progress on things that will last. And so I think we need to be relentlessly committed to not picking winners and losers, to having common sense reforms, but also to provide some gives, right, to things that we all care about, right? Community engagement, making sure that there's some co-creation and co-benefits between energy projects and the places where they're developed. Now it would be the time to secure some wins by being good political winners and generous political stewards. So I think that's important. And all of this, of course, is in spirit of finding a middle way. And, once politics shift, the middle way, like the things that we could get done right now, we would have given our right arm for under, a Biden administration. And so it's really interesting. Now would be the time to compromise on things that we think would have been an extraordinary win and will someday again be a good win. And all of that is in spirit of being good winners. Like whether or not you feel like as oil and gas industry people that you're on the politically winning side, you may not feel like that, but the world looks at you like that there's like Republicans are dominating at a federal level and that industry writ large, oil and gas companies, and even businesses generally are all winning right now. So now would be the time to be civic-minded leaders thinking about what can and should get accomplished in this environment. So I think that's really important. At the heart of that theme, at the heart of all my work, is that we are not reactionary political actors as leaders in the oil and gas industry. We are civic-minded leaders charged with stewarding our resources, our technology innovation, our creating of the energy future. We are stewards tasked with those options, and we need to do so in the best interest of society as a whole, in the best interest of our country or countries, in the best interest of our world and our many generations represented in our companies, but also the many generations represented in each of our families. And so I guess that's how I'll end today, is I would like to call on you to be good stewards of our energy present and our energy future. And that means articulating what a middle way looks like and working toward that right now while we actually have the political advantage. That's my episode for today. Thank you so much for joining me on Energy Thinks. I love having this chance to think out loud with you. I welcome, as always, your thoughts and feedback on what I'm talking about. If you like what you're hearing, please take a moment and rate Energy Thinks wherever you hear your podcast. It really does help other listeners find us. You can now pre-order my book on Amazon. Right now, it's just the Kindle version, but the paper version will be coming in just a couple weeks. In August, we will be launching the paper version. And as soon as that's ready, I'll let you know. You'll see that in my weekly newsletter. Both of these things are true. I'd like to thank my colleague, Kayla Chieves, for making all things Energy Thinks possible. Until next time, I'm Tisha Schuller, wishing you and yours happiness, prosperity, and good health.